Today we're going to talk about the Mythical Man Month. It's written by a guy called Fred Brooks, who's part of the IBM New York team in the, I guess he must have started in the 50s, moving on into the 60s. And this was the era of IBM wanting to step beyond architectures that absolutely needed to be programmed in assembler. They wanted a paradigm shift in writing operating systems, although they still ended up using assembler for that. They wanted higher level languages. They wanted a big leap forward. And the 360 series did give us several big leaps forward. There is no question about it. The Mythical Man Month is a myth because, unless you are very, very lucky, and it only happens occasionally, men and months are not interchangeable. Now, since it was first written, getting on for 45 years ago now, in 1975, I'm afraid there's no chance of getting it called a person month or anything like that. So I am only following the actuality, and I'm afraid that some of the graphs I draw will have men versus months, but if you want to put person power down there, absolutely fine. The era that you've got to project yourself back into, which is a lot easier for me than for many of you, is the 1960s. And there was a really awkward situation that the basics of computer hardware, at least, were understood.
IBM computers solve in minutes problems that once took weeks, months, even years.
And what was understood was that having more memory cost a lot of money. In a previous video, I pointed out, and two IBM salesmen came, buttoned up, holding, that 1 megabyte of IBM memory for the 360 series, which came as a meg in a box for demonstration purposes, but could be supplied in a more chassis mountable format later, that 1 megabyte would have cost you $100,000. Now, Fred was the leader of the team that had not only got to specify the hardware. Was it going to be 6-bit characters? How much maximum memory could you have and all that? They not only were going to specify the hardware, they were also going to try and move on from that to writing an operating system, because they realized that this was classic 60s situation. Even IBM customers won't be able to afford to buy, let alone air condition, one of these mainframes per programmer. It's going to be a big shared machine, so we're going to have to give value for money and make sure that it's got a good multi-user, multitasking operating system, and there's another major task that has to be taken on. Turn of 1950 to 1960 is not very long after genuinely first generation machines were gradually getting, how should we say, outdated. And think back, EDSAC 1949, one I'm familiar with, it used basically the Bordeaux code. It was 5 bits. 2 to the power 5 is 32. That's not too bad, you say, until you reflect that for your data you want alphabetics 26 and you want numerics 10. That's 36 slots gone already. How do you get over it? Well, you have what's called a shift character. This is still here on keyboards, or simulated keyboards we use today. All of this was a known factor, and the pressure then on all architects was, shall we make a tentative step forward? How about going for 6 bits? And in, how should we say, group discussions within ICL, within boroughs, within every other IBM competitors, oh, an extra bit, oh, that's going to cost a fortune. Will our customers pay for that? Because, you know, adding that onto every single location, oh, it doesn't bear thinking about. Yes, I think if we price it carefully, we can get away with 6 bits. And certainly, again, some of you may remember, I think I referred to this earlier, when I came to Nottingham, we were stuck with a 6 bits per character computer. The ICL 1900 series, it had 6-bit characters, and you could pack 4 of them into a word, which might be able to hold a biggish integer, although 24 bits isn't very big. So to get even bigger agglomerations. You had to, as it were, electronically link two of these together. By the time you got to 48-bit words, you were getting to a stage that at least you could do single precision arithmetic almost accurately enough to keep an engineer happy. If you look up, as I have had to do, the details about Fred, and by the way, he's aged in his early 90s. And for those of you who are going to make sarcastic comments in the comments, no, I haven't met him. I'd love to meet him, I really would. It would be a great treat and a great privilege. But Fred, leader of the team, who had been on earlier IBM 6-bit machines, not going to have the power and penetration of this new planned series, he said, no, really, 6 bits is not enough. Okay, you could do the alphabet, but you can't do the alphabet in upper and lower case, which is what we want. We increasingly want to be able to typeset stuff, so we need to be able to distinguish between lowercase g and uppercase g. And they really ought to have codes of their own. And when you tot it up, numbers, uppercase, lowercase, some punctuation, 2 to the 6, 64, it's not quite big enough. Obviously, all hardware people know it's unthinkable to have a hardware byte that is actually an odd number of bits. That way does madness lie. But we have got to be brave here. Let's go for the 8-bit byte. And of course, a byte meant in those days any agglomeration of bits that your machine deemed to be worthy of holding a character. And I could just imagine, Fred, have you gone completely off your rocker? Have you any idea how much this will cost? And I think that my retort would have been, well, look, they're IBM customers and they know they're getting the best. This isn't any memory, this is IBM memory. And in a way, I can see that if anybody was going to pioneer and do this, it had better be IBM, because they had customers that could afford to be alpha testers on this idea for them and to report back whether it was a good idea or not. To shorten the story somewhat, they did go for the 8-bit byte, but also what came along with that, and I don't know again if it was somebody else on the team or whether it was Fred or whatever, also came up with the idea of as follows. There'll be a temptation to put in or make possible an agglomeration of 4 of these 8-bit entities. That's 32 bits. That will hold a very decent size integer indeed. Because on a 6-bit machine, digging out each 6-bit character from a 24-bit agglomeration, oh, it makes me shudder to think about it. You needed bit shift operators. You needed to shift left the 6 bits on the left into a vacant word, as it was, 24-bit word, and then shift them back again and throw away the other stuff or do whatever. And somebody on that IBM team said, no, we make the bytes be addressable. Had I been the chief hardware man, I'd have probably had 50 fits, because you are making the address bus be that much wider, yeah? You're basically saying, no, it's not, I'm not pointing at one big thing, I'm pointing at lots of smaller things individually. However, of course, Fred would say, yes, but once you've landed on that thing, and don't forget, a lot of our programmers and a lot of our customers use COBOL, and if we make our characters be 8 bits, then all our character-based programming from which our bread and butter comes is immediately, probably an order of magnitude faster, almost, than it would be on lesser machines, because we've got the 8-bit addressable byte. So anyway, he won the day, and I think the rest is history, because looking up his biography now, I was amused to find at the bottoms when people said, Fred, what are you most proud of? What was your biggest contribution to System 360 architecture? And he didn't say making people aware of the Mythical Man Month. He said, no, winning the battle that we didn't need a 6-bit byte, we needed an 8-bit byte. And I was so glad to see that down there in black and white. In a way, the thing we're going to talk about for the latter part of this talk now, he would have regarded, I guess, as a very nice, desirable side effect. He decided in the 1970s to write an account of how we did it on the 360, but in a chatty, accessible kind of storytelling almost kind of mode. And right at the start, and in various places in this book, do make sure you get the 1995, 20 years after version, because it's got not only the original reproduced, but it's also got an analysis of where I went wrong, says Fred Brooks. Why did he make his name with that, and what was it all about? I have here a chart. He plots out a task which is typically reckoned to be 9 man-months of labour. And he said, okay, let's accept that, see what it means. 9 man-months. What this means is that if I put one person on that task, it will indeed take them 9 months. If I put 2 persons on that task, then of course it'll halve the time, won't it? It'll only take 4.5 months. If I put 3 people on it, it'll take 1/3 of the time. It'll take 3 man-months, and so on, until the limit point comes that if I can only afford 9 programmers to put onto this task, it will all be done in 1 month. Stop, he says. That is an idealized situation almost never realized in practice, because it assumes that your 9 people do not have a need to communicate with each other, that these tasks are truly separable and in parallel. A bit like picking tomatoes or strawberries or something like that. You have your own patch, you don't bump into anybody else, you can pick independently of all the other pickers in the vegetable field. Something like that. And he said this very, very rarely happens. It just isn't like that. The situations in the layer below you in the hardware where you can get genuine parallelism like that, like fetching bits in parallel, since those bits are on separate wires and don't interfere, then yes, this sort of argument. But when it's real people who need to consult, then it goes more like this. First, he said, let's take a look at the absolute polar opposite of everything being separated and everybody can do their own thing. I do believe that this thing that is now on my left, I think it's a rectangular hyperbola, because the product of the x and the y numbers yields a constant number, as it were. 9 times 1 is 9, 3 times 3 is 9, and so on. He then points out, he said, your worst nightmare is to take on 9 people in order to get a 9-fold increase you hope. But unfortunately, your underlying task is not fully and independently partitionable. It's one of these horrid things where the person who does a little bit at the beginning and says, oh, that's my month now, I want my money, has to hand over the state of his calculation to the next person along. And you say, well, why can't the person hand it over earlier? No. If it's one of these awful problems where you have to compute a magic number to be handed on to the next stage, you can't hand it on until you've computed it. So it's pointless hiring 9 folks up front. You're just going to have to pay them furlough money while they sit there twiddling their thumbs, because they haven't had the kickstart that their particular contribution. So it's like a passing on of a token in a relay race. If you've got a problem that really is like that, it's innately serial from start to finish, then you are in deep trouble. You can pour men and money and material into it until you're blue in the face, you won't get it below 9 months. Worst possible case. But then he said, oh, it's never quite that bad often. Let's go to intermediate possibilities on the next sheet. Now, as you might imagine, all that does is it takes our previous perfect rectangular hyperbola, shifts it up a bit, and you can see here the net result is pretty much what you expect. You try adding men as fast as you can, but it levels off higher than being down here, which is the genuine asymptote where it's headed for the axis. It doesn't do that, and that's because there's enough inherent serial communication there to shove the curve up a bit, and you can't do any better than that. So that would be the case for, if you like, an average program that a team might write with some intra-team communication. If you get unlucky and you get a task that has got more complex communication, you've still got time up here, you've still got men along here, but can you see what's happening now? That little curve I've drawn there is trying to get more and more like a flat straight line at the top. You remember the diagram before last. There's still enough parallelism in there that it doesn't quite flatten itself out into a straight line, but you can see what happens. You get some improvement, and then you get none at all, and you just head up towards the inevitable, it's 9 man months whether you like it or not. So task with complex intercommunications can have a curve looking something like that. And what he said was, you really must bear this in mind all the time. It's no use talking about men and months as if they're interchangeable and trade-offable. They're not.
One of the things I thought when I saw this is then there's the other thing about you've got to have the handover, right?
Yes, that's right.
That first person has
Yes.
to explain what's
Yes.
going on to the second person.
That's exactly right, Sean, and I think he more or less, in different words, says that this is another thing about adding manpower to a project, particularly late on. You spend so much time explaining to the newcomers who are quite talented just why this intricate structure was necessary before they can even start any programming. So you'd have been better off not to take them on at all. And so there are various homilies in here which say, if you think you are underpowered on a project, try and realize it early. You can probably rescue the situation with more men and whatever if you recognize it early enough and take drastic action. But don't leave it until it's 1 month away from delivery time and then have a panic and saying, oh my golly, there's a year's work to go. You know, memorable phrase number 2. How did this project get to be a year late, says the big boss? And the answer is, 1 day at a time.
They're all sending their data as well. So now what we've got is a situation that wasn't handled by this concept of flow control. What we're now going to need is
I think Mike's going to demonstrate this in a second,
control.
is
We need
that
some method
Log4j is like milk, it's like water, it's everywhere.